Thanks, Mary. My name is Dyany Munson. I have been the certified peer support specialist in Idaho for 8.5 years and working in the field for about that long. It's nice to see a number of familiar faces out there. I've also been training peer support certification courses for about 6 years on and off, which I currently do with CMI. So if you know people that are interested in becoming a certified peer support specialist, you can head there to their website and look into that. Um, so I'm glad that you guys are all here today, and I know you're here because you need CEUs, but hopefully we can make it an enjoyable and educational experience on top of getting those required CEUs for the year. And if you watched my previous, the recordings of my previous thing on this same subject, there's going to be a lot of similarities, but hopefully a few differences. So before we get going, um, I want you guys to make sure that you have a copy of the Idaho um, Peer Support Code of Ethics and Code of Conduct. So that because we're going to go over that a lot as we move forward through the class, because we're going to be using a bunch of case studies as well as and scenarios that we're going to walk through. And hopefully that'll give you some more hands-on, like, oh, I can see what this is. So if prepare, be also prepared with questions because I do like to try to make this a dynamic course. Now, some basic objectives. You probably saw this. We're going to define some common terminology, review the code of ethics, and learn how healthy boundaries are core of ethical and professional conduct. We're going to learn some tips and tricks to help the peer support workforce better understand and implement boundaries between with peers and in the workplace. Boundaries are one of those things that we hear about all the time. Everybody's like, better boundaries, better boundaries, better boundaries. Do they tell you how? Do they tell you what that means? Rarely, but we're going to go into some details with that today. Um, so the purposes, boundaries in peer services, I like to say that this has a three-prong approach. Obvious and what people often talk about with boundaries is the self-care aspect. And in this aspect, it gives you a better work-life balance. It protects us from responsibilities that are not ours. It protects us from burnout and it maintains and builds our recovery, as well as our resilience. It helps us stay well and it helps us maintain our recovery. And but then there's also the aspect of peer growth. Our position as peer providers is different than a lot of other roles in the behavioral health system, in that we are never there to do for our peers ever. When we maintain boundaries well, it allows the peers to grow and move into recovery, which they cannot do well otherwise. They become less dependent on others if we do our role right and keep the boundaries in place. And it really helps them to grow. So it is more strengths based, more focused on what the peer can do rather than their limitations. It allows the building of skills, confidence, and responsibility, as well as resilience. It encourages finding of appropriate resources. A lot of times there's always barriers in the lives of the people that we work with, but they always have something that they can do. And a lot of times with different caregivers and services, peers can end up fully believing that they're defined by their limitations. There's nothing they can do. But even in the power and the choices of finding the appropriate resources, they can gain some of the confidence and independence to help them move into recovery. It also empowers individuals to make the positive changes they need to move into recovery. It's not about what they can't do, it's what they can do, but being able to recognize that only happens when proper boundaries are enacted around them. And then when it comes to ethics, those written things that we have to check off every year with a one CEU, it better supports confidentiality when we keep better boundaries. It keeps us in our lane. And so that the appropriate role is filling the appropriate position. and it supports the peer supporters recovery, as we saw in self-care, which is actually covered in 2 of the matters of our code of ethics. Maintaining our recovery is required by our code of ethics. It reduces legal liability and increases ethical compliance. So there's a lot of benefits to having good boundaries in peer services. So one of the things that we've done, and you can go to positivepsychology.com for more information on this, is we recognize that there's a lot of different types of boundaries. And I think that most of us could look at these and say, well, yes, that's a big duh, but there may be some of these that we look at and say, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe that's something I need to look at or think about a little bit more. Um, this includes mental boundaries, the freedom to have your own thoughts and values and opinions. And this involves us not feeling pressured to match what the peer is saying, but the peer not being pressured to match what we are thinking or saying either. And in this matter, there's one of the sayings that we use a lot is, we in peer support stay off the sofa. And what we mean by SOFA is an acronym for suggestions, opinions, feedback, and advice. We stay off the sofa. We do not give suggestions. We do not give our opinions. We do not give feedback. We do not give advice. Sometimes, in fact, very frequently, our peers will ask for those things. Sometimes it's a normal kind of thing, but a lot of times they have been taught through other providers or caregivers that their opinions or decisions or thoughts are not valid or not as valid as others. And in seeking validation from us, we are robbing them of the confidence they need to move into recovery. So those mental boundaries are extremely important. We want to stay off the sofa. And then there's emotional boundaries, how emotionally available you are to others. And that can look at, like, as much as I want to support you right now, I do not have the emotional capacity. Which in peer support, in maintaining our own recovery, can sometimes look like, have you talked to your counselor about that? Or I'm sorry, this is a subject that is difficult for me to talk about, and I really can't talk about it right now. Is there anybody else in your life? Who else can you talk to about this? Setting those boundaries. We don't need to be everything to everybody. Then there's material, and this is one of the more obvious ones. We don't give money. We don't take money. We don't give presents. We don't take presents. Some of the things like that. And these apply in our personal lives as well, but this is something that we want to be aware of. And then there's internal boundaries. Those are self-regulation boundaries that we set for ourselves. We'll go more in depth on those when I cover types of boundaries in the next slide. Conversational boundaries, topics that you do and do not feel comfortable discussing. Very often in peer support, this will look like politics. It could look like sports figures or famous people, other things that may detract from a session or cause feelings that can get in the way of progress. Physical boundaries, and this could be a very frequent thing that we see in peer support, is many agencies have a no-touch policy. But there's also how much personal space we feel comfortable with. Different cultures and parts of society. You go to New York, you're standing 6 inches from somebody in an elevator, you're used to it. You go to Montana and you're less than 3 feet away from somebody in an elevator, you're starting to feel uncomfortable. This will be a little bit different from place to place and from culture to culture, but those physical boundaries are important as well. And then time, how much time you spend with someone or doing something. And that a lot of times in peer support can look like, I know that this has been a really good session and it feels like you want to keep going, but our time is up and we need to move forward. And setting boundaries such as those. So then I get into level of boundaries, and this is something that I see somebody suggestions, opinions, feedback, advice is the A in SOFA. So when it comes to levels of boundaries, this is something that I've developed more on my own. But this is something I developed as I tried to develop, and because boundaries were honestly a challenge for me when I started peer services. Um, and this is something that helped me a lot in being able to develop the boundaries that were more appropriate for maintaining my own wellness, as well as promoting and empowering my peers. But internal boundaries are boundaries you set and keep for yourself regarding your own feelings and actions for and about yourself. And that can look like I am not going to get mad at myself when I try something new and I'm not good at it immediately. Or I am not going to stay up late doom scrolling on my phone when I have something to do the next day because I know I will not be able to be as well the next day if I do that. External boundaries are those you set for and enforce regarding the actions of others and our feelings about others. What that can look like external, it may be a very common one in peer support, can be external emotional boundaries, might be I am not going to feel bad or responsible for a peer who makes decisions that lead to consequences that appear unpleasant. And that can be very challenging sometimes because most of us here have worked with peers that make decisions that can lead to uncomfortable consequences. And sometimes, because most people that come to jobs like this, we want to be helpers, we want to be fixers. And when we see that, it can make us uncomfortable and give us the desire to swoop in and fix it. But in an external emotional boundary, I am not going to feel responsible because the choices were not mine. And feeling responsible for somebody else's behavior takes their power away. Then we have external physical boundaries, which is often what people talk about. I am not going to accept or or swoop in or do things or accept things at a level on a physical level. So if the peer is behaving inappropriately and I have set proper boundaries, I may end the conversation. It's never about control, but it is about recognizing where we stop and they begin and what power we have, which may mean ending a session. It may mean walking away. It may be being firm on an uncomfortable no. Other things like that. Remember this grid because we are going to use this grid in the coming slides. Okay, we're going to practice some of these things in some different scenarios. So, because emotional boundaries are how we feel about things, physical boundaries are what we do, internal are about us, external about other people. Um, so we're going to break down the peer support code of ethics in terms of boundaries. We're going to be focusing on the CPSS Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct for this presentation, but the stuff that we cover is going to apply to enough of us in different, like certified peer recovery coaches and such, that hopefully you'll be able to take what you've learned and apply it to the few differences in your code of ethics. There's a lot of similarities in all of our code of ethics. We're not going to cover every item in our code of ethics, but we will cover most of them. I'm going to present a scenario for each item, and then we're going to discuss how boundaries can best be used or misused in the situation, how that ties to ethical compliance, and what types of boundaries, such as, or what levels of boundaries, such as internal, external, physical, or emotional, would help most, and how one type of boundary might affect another. One of the things to remember is physical boundaries can be hard. It can be hard to say no, but if we set the emotional boundaries, for instance, it can make it easier to maintain the physical boundaries. So you were sent a link, and I know that it's popped up a few times in the chat, to the current Idaho Peer Support Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. Have that handed to be able to review and answer questions during the presentation. Are we ready? Any questions before we get going? I saw a hand.
Dyany,
The Q&A.
There was one question about the stay off the sofa suggestions, if you want to just go back over that.
Okay, so that sofa, I mean, like, oh my goodness, there's a lot of chat. So stay off the sofa is sofa suggestions, opinions, feedback, and advice. We avoid those for our peers. We avoid them because either we're focusing on their limitations or we're simply taking away their power. A lot of times, especially when there's physical disabilities, um, a person can feel very limited in their life. And so a lot of times we can be pretty good about, I'm not going to do that for them. I'm just going to give them some hints. I'm just going to nudge. I'm just going to suggest a little. I'm just going to do this, try to fix it a little bit. And a lot of times we do that because we feel uncomfortable recognizing the struggles or the pain that they're having. But when we do that, we're taking away their power. We're taking away their hope. We're taking away sometimes what they can do. And that is a barrier to recovery. I know we want to fix it. We want to fix it with every fiber of our being. We want to help them to not suffer. But in the long term, we get in the way of that when we give them suggestions, when we give opinions that might nudge them in a way that they may feel that our opinion is more valid than theirs. When we give them feedback sometimes, and sometimes like, but they ask for feedback. Yes, a lot of times they ask for feedback because most of their lives they've been taught that their opinions are less valid. And so they ask for feedback to make sure they're doing it right. We can't tell them what's right for their lives. Part of recovery is helping them to feel more confident and stronger in, hey, I liked this. This is better for me. Because that is what recovery is. It's self-directed. And advice is just right out. Here, I think you should do this. Mm-mm. Because it may be a great suggestion. It may be exactly what they needed. But then they have immediately become dependent on you and feel less capable of making decisions for themselves, which is a major barrier to recovery. To give somebody the freedom to succeed, they need to have the freedom to fail. They need to understand that failure is not final. They need to understand that we are going to be there for them and not because they're on the right path and what we think is right for them. That is what recovery is. It is self-directed, and it's going to involve some stumbles, but that's partially what we're there for. We are there to be with them when they stumble and let them know that the stumble doesn't matter. They are what matters, and that will help them move into recovery. That is why we stay off the sofa. The sofa hurts our peers. Um, I see. What about helping them to explore? I have a lot of people that don't know. We can support them. That does not involve the sofa. We can ask open-ended questions. That is not the sofa. What do you think? What would you like to do? What would that look like to you? What resources can you think of? What activities can you think of? What other? There's a lot of open-ended questions. If we think that we need to jump on the sofa to help them explore, we need to back up and review ourselves, because that usually means we have an idea of what it looks like to fix things in their lives, and it doesn't work that way. I use motivational interviewing a lot. Yes, motivational interviewing is huge. A lot of open-ended questions. We want lot and lots of open-ended questions. And those are great ways to stay off the sofa. Does that make more sense? We're going to get some examples as we go forward. Um, okay, so scenario one. Peer support Tim has a good rapport with his peer John. John doesn't have a lot of natural support, so Tim sometimes gives John rides outside of their session times. And they have long conversations there, sometimes about some of Tim's struggles. So, which code of ethics are being violated in this scenario? Anyone? One is dual relationships. Absolutely. He is being peer support, but he's also being transport. Absolutely inappropriate. Another dual relationship is, hey, I want you to be helping me. I'm now talking about myself. And those are both inappropriate. What else do we got? Boundaries. Yeah, but is that a code of ethics violation? I need code of ethics violation specifically. If you can give us the exact which code of ethics we're giving, that's going to be better. Code of ethics 1. So role modeling recovery. Is Tim in this scenario role modeling recovery well? I would say not. So somebody said 10. Um, Yeah, working outside of work hours, that is not an ethical boundary. That is not an ethical violation, but does fall under dual relationships because he's doing things outside of work hours and holding more than one role in John's life, right? I need ethical violations here. Got 15. Um, so that's another possibility. I'm finding in my notes that I didn't number these all properly. So we get a lot of 10, and I'm going to have to pull this up myself so I can you guys tell me, and like, okay, we have 10, that's a good number. Can we get, and 15? I'm going to read off what I have in my notes because apparently I didn't number them all properly. He is not role modeling recovery very well, in some of his decisions and the conversations he's having with his peer. And that's part of our code of ethics. He's not necessarily respecting the rights and dignity of those that he serves because he's taking away his power to find his own solutions for some of um, his limitations, right? He's becoming dependent on the peer support person by, oh, I can just call my peer supporter to give me a ride. And that's not respecting the peer's rights and dignity to build up those resources for themselves and move into recovery. He's not conducting himself in a manner that fosters his own recovery. He is now feeling responsible for his peer support, for the peer that he's supporting. And as such, um, he is putting himself in a position to possibly move into burnout, right? Um, he is oversharing. He is not causing trauma to his peer. There's no evidence of that, but oversharing would be inappropriate. We need to be very careful in what we label as trauma. Don't believe social media, basically, on that one. But he is not conducting himself in a manner that fosters his own recovery and dual relationships, as we have seen. Equalizing power differentials. How can you can see the possibility of how this might not work to equalize the power differentials? If he's presenting himself as the power for transportation, is that putting himself in a position of higher power? Um, because if he presents himself as more than what his role is, that upsets the power differential a bit. And is the documentation that he presents going to be true and accurate if he doesn't include all the things he's doing outside of the session time? Exactly, it is not. And needs to be part of what we have to do is remain aware of our skills and our limitations. Is he fully aware and working with his skills and limitations in this sense? Uh, so I don't believe he is. Yeah, I say, what was this? Like jump looking at the chat. So certified peer support specialists openly share their personal recovery stories, not specific personal contact, concurrent struggles. We want to be able to either emphasize in a general way or share how we found solutions. We are asked to do that. Sometimes there will be some of our illness stories that are appropriate to share to relate to our peers. Otherwise, they may not believe us when we say, I've been there, but I can't tell you that. That's secret. No, we need to be able to connect, but we don't do it seeking solutions, right? We do it to connect. We do it for a specific purpose. So, guys are doing really great on this so far. So what damage? So now we've looked at the ethical, we like to check box those rules, but what damage is possible from the ethical violations in this scenario, and damage to whom and how? Disempowerment, exactly. John has had some of his power taken away because he's not having to make decisions or grow or anything like this. Yep, Pamela, it's called strategic sharing. Absolutely. Disempowerment. What other damage is possible? Peers not learning to problem solve. Absolutely. Is that have we all found that to be an essential part of our own recovery? Is learning how to problem solve things that sometimes seem insurmountable? Absolutely. The power differential. Yeah. Becoming dependent. Now, remember, dependent means you're reliant on somebody else. Codependent means we have a need to be needed. When we are codependent, we are swooping in to save somebody because we are dependents in some way. We don't feel like we are enough or valid unless we're fixing somebody else. Okay. So codependent is not dependent, is not reliant on somebody else to do for us. Codependent is something that we are doing to ourselves. Okay. Not building natural supports or other healthy people in the community. Absolutely. John has no incentive to do that because boundaries are not being set and enforced. Damage to peer supporter because he seems to be acting like a friend and not, well, having a friend is not necessarily going to cause us damage, but it may put us in a position where we're expending too much of ourselves and that role is fuzzy. It takes away their ability to choose for themselves. It can do that for a peer in this position. It's, oh, I don't have to fix it. I don't have to find a solution. I can just be dependent on my peer support. I know they're going to help me. And is the peer going to think ill of the peer supporter in this case? Probably not. They're probably going to think, this is my best friend. I can always count on them to do stuff. That does not mean it's not hurting them, right? It's just like if you give a kid candy every day, you're going to be their favorite person, but we're not doing them any favors, are we? Um, Difficult placing boundaries of a situation becomes dangerous. Absolutely. We have now set expectations that are going to be difficult to back away from. But before you did this, but why are you mean to me now? If we actually reach the point where, oh no, now there's problems from not having these boundaries. Um, and then damage to future providers. Absolutely. This is something we don't always think about, but I've seen it so often. I call these bad boundary Bettys or bad boundary Bobs. I don't know how many of you guys have been in a situation where you served with a peer who has worked with a bad boundary Betty or a bad boundary Bob. And the peer is like, but this person did this. My last peer provider did this. My case manager did this. Why don't you do that? And meanwhile, they have become dependent on other people, thinking for them, doing for them, other things like this. And they become, it's almost a feeling of entitlement, but on expectations. When expectations are not met, people get upset, right? This happens to everybody. It's kind of the definition in a lot of ways. We're going to be upset. So if bad expectations are set, people are going to be upset, and that can get in the way of their recovery as well. Enabling. Yep, absolutely. We are enabling this person. And it's not like enabling them to become more. We're enabling them to avoid the growth that will help them move into recovery. And again, does make it harder to reestablish boundaries. You guys are getting it. So then what levels, internal or external, of boundaries would help Tim to avoid these ethical violations? Like if we could go back in time, which we can't do. But what, so I need specific boundaries. What are some specific examples of things that Tim could do to help avoid this situation? External, only meeting online. Well, that's a possibility, but it is absolutely not necessary to go to that extreme. Can he still meet with this person and this individual in person during their session times? Yes, yes, he can. Um, External, explain your role. Absolutely, we can explain our role exactly. I'm sorry, it is not my role to provide transportation outside of that. Um, Communicate the role of peer support. Only meet during set hours. Absolutely. Uh, so we don't refer people to natural supports. We can refer people to professional supports, but natural supports are chosen by the peer, and they can be anything, any support that's not paid. But we can ask open-ended questions about natural supports to help the peer recognize what natural supports may be possible. Um, Yes, don't give extra special help. Clear communication about work hours and reasonable, healthy expectation. Clear and upfront. One of the things that I see a lot of us, and I felt this myself, a lot of times we're like, well, I don't want to say no, and maybe if I kind of avoid it or kind of just like get a little bit squishy in how I present it, then they won't think I'm being mean to them. But does that ever help with boundaries? No, it does not. Clear. And the thing is, and then we get into some of the internal boundaries. If I don't feel responsible for John's reaction if I say no, if I don't feel responsible for all of John's needs being met, if I don't feel responsible for his choices, then it's going to be a lot easier for me to set the external boundaries that need to be set here. Does that make sense? And internal, understand your own limitations. And here's one of the things I see on internal boundaries. It's just a little ride. It doesn't hurt. It was just on my way. It was just $1. It was just we can and do nickel and dime ourselves to death on all of these things. These kind of boundaries can it don't do that to yourself. Understanding your own limitations includes I know that if I say yes to this, it's going to make things harder to say no in the future. It may not be too much now, but if I can't say no in the future, it's going to add up. If I do an extra ride for this peer, I'll need to do more extra rides for this peer. If I say do extra rides for this peer, do I feel obligated to now give extra rides to all my peers? If you have 10 peers and you're giving one extra ride to those peers every week, that's a lot of time, right? And you're nickel and diming ourselves to death. And then where does it stop, right? It's much easier to set boundaries and hold them than having to reestablish later. Absolutely. Internal, understand that no is okay. Absolutely. This is something a lot of us, especially if our maladaptive coping skills are based in the fawn fear response where I need to please things and to be good, right? But no is okay. In fact, no is where growth happens. No is how we, if we can clearly define the line between us and them, then they can find their power. If we start seeping over there, their power cannot be found because we're taking it from them. So when we say no, that allows strength to be built. That allows people to move into recovery. No is a complete sentence. Um, Absolutely. So no is a really powerful thing. One of the things I like to say sometimes is we have to recognize the purpose of the barbell. Barbells in a gym serve one purpose, and that is to offer resistance if we engage with them. Resistance, we don't like resistance. We don't like things being hard, but that is how they do their job to help people be stronger, right? By being difficult, by offering that resistance. That is how strength is built. And so when we set those boundaries and keep them well, um, oh, I love that. Lisa said, if I've told peers that don't like a boundary, I've said that I'm modeling boundaries. That can be really good. And I've had some, but if we can keep those well, the peer can gain more confidence if they choose to engage with it. Because people can say, well, I don't like this. I'm going to fire you and find a provider that has bad boundaries. They can choose that, right? That's not a reflection on us, is it? It doesn't mean we did anything wrong. Um, so there's just so much value to that. So we already did a lot of this. What specific boundaries would be appropriate to set and enforce? Now, one of the things when we set boundaries is we need to always include the consequences of violation of that boundaries. Remember, consequences are not punishment. A lot of times people hear consequences and they're like, oh, no, no, I don't like those. No, consequences can be good too, right? Sorry. Consequences can be good, but when it comes to boundaries, punishments are emotional. Punishments are because we want to hurt and are angry. And a lot of times punishments can come when we've been bad about boundaries and then the resentment builds up and then we blow, right? And so but so when we can set the consequences, boundaries without consequences are just kind of suggestions and wishes, and that person has no real reason to keep them. But if there's consequences, such as, well, with the consequence with giving a person a ride outside of meetings, the consequence is they ask, we say no. There's not necessarily consequence with that. But if the consequence is, for instance, if we're keeping with informed consent, and if we show up and a peer is intoxicated, we cannot meet with the peer, correct? Because they do not have the capacity to consent for that session. And so the boundary is, I will let you know, I cannot meet with you today. We've talked about this before. And then that peer may be upset, but we don't have to make it emotional, right? Here's the consequences. I cannot meet today. And what choices can you make in future sessions so that to make sure that we can meet? And the power is in the peer's hands, right? Um, so here's a question from in the chat. Sharia says, I've been a long time struggler with boundaries and saying no, but I've come to realize that sometimes when I say no, or that's not something I'm willing to do, if they say others before me have, it not only makes things easier on me, but it's a way to teach them how to respect boundaries and how to hold to those boundaries. And it teaches respect for themselves and for others as well, right? If we are modeling setting good boundaries and having worth without pandering or trying to do everything for everybody, that's a good thing to model, right? Consequence identifying helps the peers make a choice that they understand the importance of. Yes, it puts the power in their hand. When we give them consequences, especially beforehand, they better have the choices on what they want to do. And they have the power. They may say, you can't do that. That's so mean to me. You have the power to choose. That is really empowering, even if they don't like it. But I want to have my cake and eat it. We don't get to choose that, right? And consistent boundaries helps both parties stay accountable for their actions and reduces hurt feelings. Consistency is really important in this sense. Peers will also trust you more knowing you're genuine. Absolutely. When I have been consistent about my boundaries, a lot of us sometimes will get afraid. Oh, they won't like me. They'll be so upset with me. But when I am consistent with boundaries, most peers learn, especially when I can say them forthrightly without pussyfooting around or trying to dodge saying them directly, They know that they can believe what I say, and that can be very valuable. Um, so excellent. You guys ready for another scenario? So scenario 2, peer support Sally has a peer named Jane with a physical disability that limits her mobility. Sally doesn't have a lot of physical strength, but she pushes herself to help Jane get in and out of Sally's car, as well as get Jane's wheelchair loaded into the trunk. Jane seems really thankful, so Sally knows she can't let Jane down by showing any reluctance or weakness. Sally knows Jane relies on Sally's help and feels successful when she is able to get Jane where she wants to go. So this I don't know if any of you guys have been in a situation like this, but I want you to think about this a bit. So which code of ethics are being violated in this scenario? I'll let you guys get some stuff going in the chat there. Well, we got some stuff now. And you guys are doing numbers, you're making me look stuff up. I should have set better boundaries on that one. Okay. So we have number 2, respecting the rights and dignities that those that they serve. How is this being less respectful of the peers' rights and dignities? I'm getting lots of numbers. I'm going to ask it again. So a lot of people have said this violates 2, which is respecting the rights and dignities of those that they serve. How is Sally not respecting the rights and dignities of Jane in this scenario? Because we're doing everything for them and they're not learning. Yeah. Are we seeing them as their limitation, or are we seeing them as a person? She's taking away Jane's independence. One of the things about peer support and recovery-based programs is that they are person-centered. If she sees now, is Jane, does she have those physical limitations outside of peer support hours? And has she had them before she started peer support? Yes, she has. So if Sally feels obligated, feels like she has to meet that need, is that accurate, or is that kind of a mindset that we have as she's only seeing the disability? And is that person-centered? It is not person-centered. And this is something that sometimes we have to, that takes some self-reflection on our part. And oh, Lisa's, I've actually been in this situation. I have lifting restrictions. Power differentials are affected if I do things that are injurious to me in order to do for her. Being aware of my own skills and limitations. Yes, that is another one. And Shauna, it's only seeing the disability. Now, sometimes we're like, but I just want to help her, but we are believing that she can't. We're focusing on the can'ts. And that is not person-centered. Now, even if Jane cannot, has limitations in her movement, does she have capabilities? She does have capabilities. What do you think some of her capabilities may be that may help in this situation? She's had this disability, let's say, all of her life. Yeah, so they may know how to use a transfer board. Do you think they have other providers that are physically there that are around that are there for physical assistance?
Mhm.
Do you think that they have the capability of knowing what the resources are and tools that they may have? Yes, yep, we'll get some yeses. So resources are things she's been using or doing before your service. Absolutely. So what power she's limited in what some things she can do because of the disability. But Sally is now taking away the few things that Jane can do by deciding that she has to define Sally by her limitations and swoop in and save her, doesn't she? That's taking away her power. Is that a very nice thing to do to somebody? But I'm helping them. But is it a very nice thing to do to somebody to take away what power they have? I assume you mean no and not Joe, Shauna. But correct. No, it is not a very nice thing to do to somebody. Um, so let me go back up to the numbers you guys had because there was a lot. Okay, there was a lot of 15, and we conduct ourselves in a manner that fosters own recovery, and that is not what Sally is doing. As I think it was Lisa brought up, there's some restrictions, and Sally's feelings of obligation put her in a position to hurt herself. Because I can tell you from experience, it's not always easy to put somebody into a car from a wheelchair or to even put wheelchairs in a vehicle. And that can be very difficult as well. Let's see, what else do we have? Uh, we have some fives, which are, um, I already did five. Hold on. And there's a few 15s. Let's see what 15 is. Remain aware of their skills and limitations and do not provide services or represent themselves as expert in areas for which they do not have sufficient knowledge or expertise. Even if Sally did not have physical limitations, let's say this was easy for her, is that her role to provide physical support? Nope, absolutely not. So that would be a violation of 15. Absolutely. Let's see what else we got. Dual relationships. Absolutely. This is a dual relationship. Now we're being physical support on top of being peer support. Dual relationship, another ethical violation. Trying to scroll through all your answers. So we're getting in the way of this person's recovery. Sally's getting in the way of this person's recovery, right? So then what damage is possible? We've gone over some of them, but what damage is possible from the ethical violations in this scenario? To whom and how? She becomes reliant on others, not herself. She doesn't learn what power she has. Absolutely. Keeps her dependent. Power differential. Uh-huh. What else? Do you think Sally might hurt herself? Mm-hmm. Does not foster problem-solving skill development? Absolutely. Lack of ability to build strength through recovery? Absolutely. Um, Sally could hurt herself. Is it possible that in moving her, because she's not trained or necessarily capable to do so, that there could be a injury not just to Sally, but to Jane? How happy do you think an agency would be if that happened? Let's see. Lisa has this great example. Providing physical support can go very wrong. I experienced this with a friend, not a peer, trying to help her in and out of a car. She could not do it, and I ended up trying to hold her halfway in. Oh man, this sounds painful. Halfway in and halfway out of the vehicle and could have dropped her. Luckily, others saw and came to help, but we had to lay her on the sidewalk until emergency services arrived. And that is the kind of situation. Can you see someone losing their job for a situation like that? Yeah. This is not a good situation in many, many ways. Not just in the emotion and the mental health recovery for Jane, but also in physical risk, right? One of the reasons we stay in our lane, right? Yes, and sued on top of it. So what types of boundaries would help Sally avoid the ethical violations? Or types or levels? And give examples of what those might look like. The effect of peer support has been minimized because of blurred lines in giving the help. One of the things I will tell you is that peer support, when they've done studies, is one of the most helpful community-based supports there are, because we support somebody in actually moving towards recovery, not enabling them, not swooping in, not making them dependent, but helping them actually find the strengths and things that they can do. When we blur the lines in giving help, that diminishes the support and the help that peer support can do. No caregiving, peer support only, absolutely. Yeah, the peer support specialist is taking ownership of the success. They're defining success by, oh, did we get to the place we were wanting to go? Then I was successful, and it was because I set these bad boundaries. That's not really what the success is. Do not make the peer's goals your goals. Let me explain that. Let's say with this scenario, Jane has a goal of getting to Walmart. If Sally makes that goal her goal, she's going to work very hard to get them to Walmart. And that can involve letting some things be fudged, crossing some boundaries, doing more than she's supposed to be doing. But is that what Sally is there for? Nope. We are there to support a peer in their recovery. And their recovery is gaining the skills, gaining the resources, building the resilience, building the strengths. And she got in the way of that because she made the goal, the peer's goals, her goals, rather than the actual goal of, I'm there to support Jane. Yep, staying in your lane. We are not medical providers. External, have a conversation about boundaries. Um, and we don't want to mess up with the future expectations. Absolutely. Boundaries on our physical limitations as an external boundary, an internal boundary for the peer to be okay with not over assisting the peer by seeing the physical limitations. So we can't decide if the peer is going to be okay with it or not, but we can set, and that's not something we can set a boundary on, but we can set a boundary on how we react, even if it takes practice, right? So peer support is also lowering her self-efficacy. If it has bad boundaries, it can. Any service can lower somebody's self-efficacy with bad boundaries, right? And the peer support needs to be okay. So some specific boundaries I might set in a situation like this is letting them know beforehand, this is the support that I can offer with this situation. If I have physical abilities, I might say, I cannot move you into my car, but if you are, but I can hold on to the chair while you transfer yourself with the transfer board into my vehicle. That may be a boundary I can set. Doesn't mean I don't have to do absolutely anything. And if the peer says, well, I'm not going to do that, and I will say, that's okay. But if what other resources do you have to help you to move into a car? Well, I don't want to call anybody else because they'd have to be with us when we got there. Okay. What other forms of transportation would be helpful for you in this situation? Open-ended question. You see how this works? Because I cannot and will not transfer you in and out of my car. In which case, if the peer says, none of those work for me, okay, what else would you like to do that does not involve going someplace in a car? Because if you require assistance that you expect from me, I will not offer the assistance in and out of my car. So if that's the only way you see to get in and out of a car, and there are other forms of transportation not good, then we won't go anywhere. That is a boundary. And the way I said it sounds a little bit mean, but there are other options. Letting them know that it's not about judgment. It's about, this is not an option for us to go somewhere where I help you in and out of the car. If that's the only way you feel that you can go somewhere, then you can choose that, but that means that we can't go anywhere, right? And because they have choices and they can get very upset. I've known this from experience, but this is where they build their power. Right? So somebody, Sherry, I had a former coworker who was helping an old client who required a gate belt and such, and the coworker ended up falling out a window as the client was about to fall, so the coworker intervened instead. It was that coworker was later told that the coworker shouldn't have done that due to the liability of things. And this was in caregiving and not peer support or anything, but it's still a very, absolutely, every role has boundaries, right? Every role has those sorts of things. I have not been trained to help you move. That is a good way to say no. But it is not my role to help you. Even if we've had training on it, still not our role, right? What if their goal is to go outside and enjoy the day? What if we made that our goal? How would that be a problem? Because that's a valid goal for somebody to get out. I want to get out of the house. That's a valid goal, right? But if we made that our goal, can we see that making it hard to set some boundaries? What if the peer is like, I want to get out and enjoy the day. You have to take me. You have to do this, that, and the other. You have to physically lift me. Well, if we let their goal become our goal, are we going to feel obligated to, oh, okay, because that's the only way to do it because that's what you said. So that's not a bad goal. And supporting the peer is not a bad thing, but supporting them, if it becomes too important for that goal to happen, then we're going to make bad choices. It's going to be harder. So this is a very common thing Nicole brings up. We have set a set boundary at the agency I work for that states we aren't to put our hands on any clients. That is a very frequent boundary that rule that many agencies set. So I've done things like offered a step stool or driven my other car that is easier to get in and out of. But I do say to them, I am so sorry, I am not allowed to give you any physical assistance because I can't put my hands on you. Can you get in and out on your own? Okay, so I appreciate some of that. I'm going to give you a different way to look at it. This is going to be a little bit bigger boundary. First thing is, rather than offering a step stool, what might be something that you could find that might support you better with that? Because it is our obligation to provide material goods to make that person to help that person out. Nope. Can that make it harder for them in other situations when we provide such things? Yep. We can support them in researching how they can get out on their own. That's another possibility. Open-ended questions are great with stuff like this. But like we said, this disability exists long before we were there and in every aspect of their life. You can bet your sweet bippy that there's some things that they have seen or done, and that when we come in and say, I have to fix this, we're taking the power and we are assuming so little of this person, even though this is their entire life. It is very not person oriented. And there are, somebody says our agency always has a print off for peers on the bus schedules. There's a lot of tools and services and such like this that can be supportive, but the less that we hand to our peers, because remember we want to stay off the sofa, the better. So I usually start as broad as possible with what do you know of what have you used before? What do you know of? Where can you look? What resources do you know of? But one of the things, going back to the original situation, I do say to them, I'm so sorry, I'm not allowed to give you any physical assistance. I would not apologize, because that was not your role. It's not that you're not allowed to do it. It is inappropriate, and you'll be taking their power. What I do say to peers in that kind of circumstance is, I know that I'm only seeing a flash in the pan, and so I know you have resources with stuff like this. What resources do you usually use? What tools do you usually use? I am not here to take your power. And if they're like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and then it's like, well, where do you think you can look? How can I support you in finding a solution? Because I don't need to apologize for supporting them in moving into recovery. If I'm apologizing, it means I feel responsible and I have poor internal boundaries. And the second an outside thing went away, I would be swooping in to take away their power. And I've learned that I don't like hurting peers that way. My role has these boundaries for a reason, and that is to support somebody moving into recovery. So that is something I would do in that situation, and I have done. Now, does that sometimes make peers mad? Yes. But if they are like, oh, fine, maybe I can find something, do they now have more power? Even in looking for solutions, do they have more power? Do they have more autonomy? Are they being seen for who they are and not their limitations? Yes. So I might say, what, and can you get in and out on your own? That's a possibility, but we assume that there are tools that they've used and resources that they've used, because this isn't new. This isn't new for them. So it's like, what do you usually do to get in and out? What resources do you usually use? What services do you usually use? Because acting like it's a brand new thing that just started is very diminishing to that person and their experience, and seeing their limitations. I'm seeing a lot more boundaries here. I never apologize for setting boundaries. Excellent. Boundaries are there for, they do support everybody in the situation, but we don't need to apologize for doing something that's going to support the peer better. And that's what boundaries do. Advocacy, like the self-advocacy that's part of recovery, comes from sometimes from helping, from discovering, I'm going to reward this though, from discovering options, making lists, and seeking to understand what the peer. So I'm going to reward that. Advocacy on the part of the peer, which is part of their recovery, comes from discovering options and discovering ways to find options. The peer making lists, the peer seeking to understand more about themselves and the power and the strengths that they have, right? What's worked for you in the past? Who could assist you in accomplishing this goal? Or what, other things like this. You guys have some really great stuff. Can a family member join? No. Now, if the family member is the person's PCS, personal care service, that may be something else. That's something to talk to your agency about. But if the person is there for personal assistance, then that may be something that's appropriate. Scrolling through your comments. Maybe make a peer-to-peer service contract. This is part of what informed consent is. The way that some best practices on that usually involve, when we start services with a peer, one of the things I would tell the peer is, I am here to support you while you find your strength and build up on the skills you want to build up and working towards the goals that you want. And I don't do for, I do with, and I help support you to help you feel a bit safer while you try. That I'm here for you, not for the goals. That's the way I do it, so I don't have to have this huge laundry list of everything I don't do, right? And so they can have some expectations. Now, sometimes things will come up and I'll have to set a specific boundary. But most peers, I can tell you right now, do not want to sit there for an hour while I tell them everything I can't do. But informed consent is good. And we don't, informed consent at the agency level is a lot of times in writing, but it's not always necessary. Sometimes it can be handy to have some things in writing, but not always necessary to the contract level. Um, so, and Craig says with his agency, he's not allowed to transport anyone, and that can make some things easier. But most of us do have that partially as part of our job, because connecting a peer to a resource while we emotionally support them working on their goals is appropriate in peer support, but not as a ride. We're there as emotional support. So an insurance company can cancel your insurance if they find out clients are being transported. That is appropriate, but that's the kind of thing that's not about boundaries. That's about looking into your insurance and how they see that sort of thing. Double billing, yes, you're right. Double billing will be an issue if the person is working as PCS. Thank you for bringing that up because I spaced it for the moment. But there are some things that are appropriate to happen at the same time, such as interpreters. So there's a lot of different resources that are possibly available. When it comes to transport somebody with physical disabilities, it may be a matter of supporting the peer while they use something like the access bus in the area, or that kind of transport where we're not doing the transporting, we're emotionally supporting the peer while they utilize and learn to feel comfortable with the resources that are available for them. But we don't set it up or pick it, right? What is wrong with just going outside instead of going somewhere? There's nothing wrong with that at all. And nothing was said that said there was anything wrong with that. That's not a problem. So why are we transporting them? As I mentioned, sometimes connecting someone to a resource to emotionally support them is absolutely appropriate. This is one of the things about community-based support. Are we doing it just for transport? Never. We are never taxi service. But a lot of times, and I don't know if any of you guys have felt this way, but a lot of times, if we've felt really trapped for a long time, or if we have a lot of anxiety, especially social anxiety, going to Walmart or Winco or the dollar store can be overwhelming. But that can be an important empowerment activity in our recovery, where we learn to feel comfortable with that. And a lot of times, that's exactly the kind of thing peer support is for. Oh, this access bus thing is scary. I don't even want to try it. Well, how can I support you if that's something you can go with me? That would help me feel safer. Or Walmart is very scary for me. And it's like, okay, how can I come up? Can you go with me? In which case we might be connecting them and be with me there. I would feel safer in that circumstance. Does that make sense? Because, sitting with them in their house isn't supporting them and getting stronger in a lot of these things that they're struggles for them. And that could be a big part of their goals. So in training, they say it was up to our discretion on whether to give them a ride when it comes to the session times. To a point, yes. It's always up to our discretion, but outside of session times, absolutely not. Inside of session times, your discretion, yes, but you need to look at it with deliberate intent. What are you saying no because you don't want to spend the gas? That's one thing. But then we may not be able to support them in some of the things they need support for their goals. And we're supporting the peer, not the goal itself. But if we're just like, no, that's not convenient for me, that is an us thing, not a them thing. Not always appropriate. Ask how they get to other med appointments, and encourage them to utilize that same transportation to the office. So not all peer providers, but a lot of peer providers go to the peer. That's because peer support is a community-based service. And so yes, we don't transport them to our office, but a lot of times we don't meet them at the office. We meet them in the community, either at their home or in other places. Does that make sense? So, but yes, we don't offer transportation for the sake of transportation ever. Does that make sense? Always being person focused and supportive. Boundaries are very important, but as the name of the position is peer support. Okay, I feel like there's a huge gap for people needing peer support services and peer supports of the people getting services need to help them navigate the complex systems. Okay, so there are complex systems out there and we support the peer, but when it comes to working with a lot of complex systems, if okay, this is something that helps with roles, okay? What I will ask a peer, they say, I want to do this, and it involves some complex systems. And I say, okay, what level of support do you need? Do you need someone to help advocate for you, to help you fill out paperwork, to help you pick services? In which case, that's case management. If they're doing for you that way, that's a case management role. Do you feel like you could do it, but you need some training on some skill building on how to do it? If so, that's CBRS. Do you feel that you can do it, but it's kind of scary and you want somebody there with you? That's me. That's peer support. Does that make sense? And if there's transportation involved, as long as those basic criteria are being met, we can stay in our lane. Does that help? So when it comes to a lot of times navigating the complex systems, that very frequently is a case management role. When it comes to emotional support while they work towards their goals, that is peer support. But a lot of times navigating the complex systems is less about emotional support and more about, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't do this, I need help. In which case, that's case management. Does that help? So we're getting a little bit off track a little bit with the transporting, with the waiver. Talk to your insurance, because peer support by definition is a community-based program. Some programs are very specific and won't involve that, but most of the time, most agencies, there will be some transport involved at some point. And it's going to depend on your insurance agency. Talk to your insurance agency and go. Yeah, we can support in finding the resources. We can support them while they find the resources. I'm going to reword that. We do not find, we do not, remember we stay off the sofa. No suggestions, no opinions, no feedback, no advice. Now, we are resource brokers, but when we are resource brokers, I will tell you guys right now, we start with the broad questions long before we give any information. Where do you think you could look? What have you used in the past? What have you heard about? And the more that they can have that independence rather than jumping to giving them answers, the more they move into recovery, the more power that they have. And sometimes I'll use a little bit of lived experience. When I ran it, because sometimes there's a lot of overwhelm. And so I might use some lived experience and say things like, when I'm in a situation I feel kind of overwhelmed like this, I have found I start with a Google search, and that kind of gives me some ideas. Because a lot of times it's the anxiety that gets in the way of thinking we can do it or gets in the way of finding things. It is not actually being so dumb we can't look at things, right? And so in supporting the peer while they look, we're telling them that we believe that they can. And whatever resource they do, if they don't like technology, that may look like going to a library or may look like talking to another provider. There's a lot of things like that, but we ask those open-ended questions. Does that help? No, yeah, we don't fix, we do not fix. And knowing the roles can be very helpful to staying in our lanes. Okay, we ready for another one? That transportation part can get tricky, but we can transport, though you may need to talk to your insurance provider. And if your agency has special rules, that may be different, but that is frequently part of our job if we're doing it in the course of emotionally supporting the peer, never just because they need a ride. Got it? So scenario 3. Certified peer recovery coach Tim works with a peer, Penny, who frequently flirts with Tim and sometimes gives him small gifts or treats during their appointments. Tim isn't interested in Penny and knows the gifts are cheap, so he plays along rather than making things awkward by asking her to stop. He would sometimes joke with Penny that if she advanced far enough in her recovery and didn't need services, he might take her out sometime. Which code of ethics are being violated in this scenario? 7. Oh, 7. So quick. So 7 is certified peer support specialists do not practice, condone, facilitate, or collaborate with any form of discrimination on the basis of ethnicity, race, gender, sexual, so no discrimination. And I'm looking at this and I don't see any discrimination at all on this one, actually. And if somebody can, I'm not saying it's not possible. If you do see discrimination, please tell me how. And in the chat. Otherwise, we have 7, 8, 9. And then there's no more 9 because it got eaten. So, 8. Never engage in sexual activities. Now, it doesn't matter if he's not interested. Is he still like letting her flirt and leading her along? Yes. So it's not about whether or not he's interested. It's not appropriate. Absolutely. This is absolutely inappropriate behavior. If there were interest, then the best thing to do if you find yourself interested in a peer, talk to your supervisor. I can't work with this peer. Because those are feelings, and it's like, feelings are feelings, but that's going to be a dangerous thing. This is absolute. So all of the things we've talked about involve professional boundaries being crossed. This one makes all of us go, what? Because it's very obvious, right? It's not helping her recovery and not modeling good behavior. Oh, absolutely. Maybe harassment. According to a company policy, that's a possibility. Not necessarily. It's wrong on a lot of levels before we even get to that. Over time, the gifts can accumulate and become a bigger bill. One of the things, we don't do the gifts either way, right? The peer support code of ethics says we don't accept gifts. We also don't give gifts, but it says of a significant value. And even if they're like tiny homemade things, is this significant emotional value for Penny? Yeah, it is. So there's some really tricky things to do that. General rule of thumb, because the code of ethics is very vague, don't give stuff, don't take stuff, period. Now, your agency may have more specific rules on that, but that's a good rule of thumb because that is really, really. Now, one of the things with code of ethics, it includes colleagues. So if you have a coworker and you're like, man, I like them, is it appropriate for us to ask them out? Nope. That's all the way inappropriate. Oh, it's expectations for the gifts that have been given. That's true. The inappropriate behavior towards the provider as well. Now, that can be true, but are peers bound by a code of ethics? Nope. So even if the peer's behavior is inappropriate, Tim could set boundaries here, right? You say, I'm sorry, I don't feel, be very clear and upfront. I don't accept gifts, and if it starts to be pretty obvious that Penny has feelings, like, I'm sorry, I don't feel that way about you, and we don't want the consequences, right? So, and the consequences are about the behavior, not about the person. So, I would appreciate it if you don't flirt with me. If you continue to flirt with me, I will have to talk to my supervisor and find you another provider, and you'll be given another provider. Then we have the consequences. It's not a punishment. That puts the power in the peer. And now, the big thing about that is it's always about the behavior and not about the person. Because if we make, I am, ew, no. Or if we make it about the person, people can't be separated from themselves, and that can be a lot more emotionally hurtful. If it's about the behavior, that's something that people can have more power over. That is something that can be changed. Significant value, there is no, the code of ethics is vague on that on purpose, because everybody that we work with has limited income, correct? And so significant value could be $1. It doesn't matter. Your agency may have something specific, but that's why I say good rule of thumb, don't accept anything. Okay. And yeah, this cannot be avoided by men working with men and women working with women. And not everybody feels comfortable with that either. Okay. So we had that. This one kind of set off some red flags, but it also brought up some good questions and some good things with this. So if you're feeling stuff with about a peer, talk to your supervisor. Even if a peer is put on a waiting list, that can a lot of times be better. Because part of the thing, what is part of the boundaries that we need to set is our feeling of obligation, but they need help, and so I need to be there. If somebody makes you uncomfortable, if somebody makes you have feelings that would be inappropriate in a professional relationship, there is no obligation to work with that peer. Okay? No obligation. We have had cultural issues where not accepting a gift could have been more harmful than accepting it. So yes, go follow your agency policy on that, because I have seen and heard of situations like that. Talk to your agency about that. And I am collapsing things. So, moving on. We got another one. So, peer support Sally knows a woman named Barbara from church who has been struggling with symptoms of anxiety and depression. Sally shares some of her lived experience with Barbara and tells her about her role. And this, we do advocate for recovery, right? Barbara seems encouraged by this, and a couple of weeks later, Sally is surprised when her supervisor gives Barbara to her as a new peer. Sally needed another peer, she needed the income, and feels like she might have somehow let Barbara to seek Sally specifically out as a provider. So she feels obligated to help her and accepts the assignment. Which code of ethics are being violated in this scenario? Dual relationships, absolutely. This is now a co-congregant in church and a peer provider. Maybe even also a friend on the side. Absolutely. What else? In small towns, this can be hard to avoid. This is very true. This is the kind of thing, if it does happen, you talk to your supervisor about it. Your supervisor can help with that. Yeah, this is tough because the two relationships can be harmful to the peer. That's why the code of ethics is there. We also have 12. Let me pull up the right thing. Sorry. 12. Work to equalize the power differentials that may occur in the peer support client relationship. I like that. That is quite a good catch. Because do you think it's going to affect the power differentials when you know somebody, when you have that dual relationship like that? Yeah, that is. Um, It's a huge problem in Shoshone County. Everybody knows everybody. I get it. I get it. It can be a problem. And this is the kind of thing when we can go back to our scopes and we want the scope of current role, but talk to your supervisor. In this case, did Sally talk to her supervisor at all? Nope, she did not. What else do we got here? So what damage is possible from the ethical violations in this scenario? To whom and how? Feel the same. I think we can say that about most of the counties in Idaho. Let's all admit it. There's like 3, maybe 4 counties in Idaho that people don't know everybody else in the county. So is Sally the only peer support in the whole town? We don't know. Could be damaging to peer and peer support. How? Both professionally and emotionally with privacy. Yeah, that can make some privacy things really tricky, right? What will Sally's experience at church be like now that she will likely encounter a peer there? Yeah, that can make some awkward situations. Oh no, my church pastor. Oh, I know stuff now, right? Could be both parties, yes. Sometimes things get shared that should not. Now, yeah, and even if Sally is good at maintaining confidentiality, is Barbara bound by confidentiality? Nope. And is Sally supposed to share things with her peer? Yep. Um, the peer may divulge a lived experience shared with the peer, or the peer may decide that the peer support has violated Privacy Act due to gossip. Even if there's not gossip, sometimes people get expectations when there's additional roles put in there. If there's a referral process that isn't followed, it can show favoritism. That's a possibility as well. Yeah, there's all kinds of sticky situations here that, and as a lot of us have shared, we can sometimes see these sorts of things get really, really sticky in small towns where this is hard to avoid. Always talk to your supervisor and avoid these whenever it's possible. So what types of internal or external boundaries would help Sally avoid the ethical violations? It can be hard enough going to 12-step meetings with peers in the same room. Absolutely. It's one of the reasons that online 12-step meetings can be very popular, especially in small towns. So what what damage is possible from these? We've talked about some of the stuff. Or what types or levels of boundaries could help avoid the ethical violations? Let a supervisor know their relationship before. If the supervisor is decent and if there are options like, oh, well, we'll assign this person to somebody else. She specifically asked for you, and I should have recognized that was a red flag, right? But yes. What specific boundaries would be appropriate to set and enforce? What I might do in a situation like this is go to Barbara and say, hey, I really appreciate that you sought out peer support. That makes me feel really good about this. But, it gets kind of sticky with stuff like that. And ethically, I can't really work with you. I hope you don't mind. I talked to my supervisor and my supervisor is going to try to find you another peer support. And then we can not worry about stuff at church getting sticky, right? I had something similar happen. I let supervisor know that she did not put her on my caseload. Exactly. That's a perfect boundary. And it's one of those things where I like to communicate because we want to be transparent. But we want to communicate in a nice way. Why did you do that? No, we was like, hey, just letting you know, this is why I said no and why, we're giving you something else I really appreciate. Makes me feel good that the stuff I shared with you helped you look into that. And I hope it's really helpful for you, but it would not be appropriate for me to work with you. Physical privacy of your own experiences, all sorts of things. Yep. So, um, last scenario, which I apparently forgot to number and never caught in any of my drafting. So certified family peer support, Jenny, is supporting a family from Mexico. She finds some of their customs uncomfortable and questions if some of the religious and cultural traditions may be contributing to some of the barriers the child with a diagnosis of SED is experiencing. Discussing some of her theories with some of her friends on social media, changing the names for privacy, but including details of diagnoses and conditions. Which code of ethics are being violated in this scenario? Yeah, just no. Yeah, there's a lot of just no in here, but we get 7. We don't discriminate. There's some possible discrimination here. 14. Keeping current with emergency knowledge relevant to recovery and openly sharing that knowledge with colleagues and those they serve. I'm not sure how that applies. If you could just let me know how you think that applies, that'd help. 12 and 2. 12 is peer support specialists work to equalize the power differentials that may occur. Yeah, that's not power differential when we're talking about stuff like that without talking to the peer. And then 2, we have we respect the rights and dignities of those they serve. We're gossiping about somebody, we ain't respecting their rights and dignities, right? It could be a HIPAA violation if it's obscured, if it's not obscured enough, if it's identifiable. Like if it's the kind of thing that if somebody knew that person, they say, oh, I think I know who you're talking about, we're in trouble, right? Even if, because not using somebody's name is not always enough, right? And a CFSP code is different. Yeah, so the numbers are not going to be the same in a family support code of ethics. But if there's, but hopefully most of the rules that we're talking about are going to be similar in both codes of ethics. Respecting the privacy and confidentiality of those they serve. Absolutely, that's a big violation. So even if it's not identifiable, it just makes me feel gicky talking about stuff like that, because if somebody knows that person, I don't know that they knew them, but they're like, oh, I think I know who you're talking about. Oh, that's not okay. So yeah, public documents, yeah, that might be some stickiness there. So what damage is possible from the ethical violations in this scenario? To whom and how? Yeah, that link apparently doesn't work, but I wouldn't worry about it too much because right now we're mostly working from the core peer support code of ethics. Loss of trust for one of the family if they found out, absolutely. That would damage the rapport and damage the overall relationship. Anything else? Do you think it's possible to get bad cultural advice off social media? Sarah's like snort. Yeah. I think it's very, very possible. So, Jenny might get some, and it can affect the power differential as well. She might get some information that's absolutely invalid that affects how she treats her family. She's placing discrimination on the family, which is going to impact the sessions. Yes. One of the things about cultural sensitivity is the ultimate resource on the ultimate expert on somebody's culture, because culture is what groups we belong to, but everybody belongs to a variety of groups, right? Generation, ethnicity, nationality, religion, families, all sorts of levels. So the person's specific culture, they are the expert on that. And when we're discriminating with this person, we're going as well because we're not talking to them about it. So if you're going to be culturally sensitive, we're going to be curious and we're going to ask them questions. We're not going to ask other people questions about what this person believes and what's right, right? So yeah, that is going to impact the session because this person, the peer support, the family support specialist in this case, is interacting with this person in a way that is not respectful to them. It's discriminatory, and it's going to impact how they interact with them. It wasn't worth asking you. I went to other people because I don't trust you. And that's going to impact how they feel about them, how they treat them, and how they support them. Anything else? Yeah, if you scroll way up to the peer support code of ethics from early on, you can find a link to the family support there. She is so fired. Very well could be. And and I'm collapsing that. This person could be fired for that sort of thing. One of the things I will advise everybody here, if it's likely you have some social media account, lock it down. Lock it down like Fort Knox. Lock it, lock it, lock it. No public. I don't care if you're really waiting for that friend from the 11th grade to find you on social media and they won't be able to do so if you're not public. Don't just lock it down and don't ever talk about work. And that it gives you a bonus of not being so easily spoofed or hacked, especially on things like Facebook. What levels or types of boundaries, internal, external, etc., would help Jenny avoid the ethical violations? Nobody got nothing? So internal violations or internal boundaries might be if I'm in a situation where I am uncomfortable with somebody's behavior and that I recognize they're from a different culture, an internal boundary might be I am going to ask questions and I'm going to look at my own possible biases and prejudices to look at this more realistically. And sometimes that can mean I will be willing to talk to my supervisor. And if I think that I don't know if I'm going to be able to approach this ethically or without discrimination, I'm going to talk to my supervisor and ask this family to be reassigned. It can look like that, right? Um, Yeah, and talk to your supervisor. And if there's a provider agency from the same culture, ask them. First people to ask are the peers themselves, is the family members themselves. Because each person is the expert, their own expert on their culture. And then if that doesn't work, asking somebody in the agency from the same culture may be appropriate kind of as a backup. Because sometimes the peer may not be able to self-identify what's going on there. External physical, all conversations need to be kept in the office with your team or with your peer, right? We have that transparency and such. Um, uh, be upfront, honest with setting boundaries. Let supervisor know that it's not ethical to be a peer support for the individual. There's not a dual relationship going on here. That's not an ethical violation we're running into here. Um, so how, if at all, do you think your culture impacts the situation you're seeing with? That may be something to ask your peer. It may be something to ask yourself. How everybody has some biases. And so if having biases were a complete deal breaker, nobody could work in the field because we all have some. But if we're self-aware and we ask ourselves questions and we look at that as honestly as possible, we can hopefully adjust to be more culturally sensitive and have cultural humility. Your opinions can be harmful. They can be harmful. And so it's good to recognize that sort of thing. Do I have some biases here? How can I deal with that better? Um, and that can be, I'm going to change some stuff and adjust some stuff, and that's okay. But it can be, I think I can change some stuff, but I may not be able to do it quickly enough to be the best support for this family at this time. In which case, I talk to my supervisor, right? Um, so what, what specific boundaries might be appropriate to set and enforce? We've already talked about a number of them, haven't we? So talking to your supervisor, talking to the peer, uh, having a general rule on social media not to talk about work on social media. Ever, 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 ever. Locking down our social media accounts. I wouldn't necessarily say that we have to staff all social media, but we don't talk about work on social media and we lock our accounts down. Because part of that is we don't want our peers to be able to see the things that we post. That's a good boundary right there. Maybe educating yourself, yeah, looking stuff in. First step, of course, is always asking the peer, but other reliable sources. Showing curiosity to learn about their culture would be a great way to connect. Absolutely, that is a really great tool. When I feel I'm in a challenging client situation, I set a personal boundary to share less and communicate more with my supervisor. Absolutely, that's a good one. Sharing less can be appropriate. I also and communicating more with your supervisor is great too. One of the things, remember, because we need to role model recovery and conduct ourselves in a manner that fosters our own recovery. And if that means that a peer makes you uncomfortable, you do not need to work with them. I cannot stress this enough. So many times we feel obligated. We are not obligated. We are violating our code of ethics if we force ourselves to work with somebody who makes us feel uncomfortable. Every one of us, by definition, as peer providers, have had challenges and diagnoses that can result in certain situations being triggering, for instance. And this this position is designed in part to help foster our own recovery. So do not force yourself to work with a peer that makes you feel uncomfortable. Okay. Now, here's some other tips with boundaries. Okay. Avoid letting your peer's goal become your goal. I've mentioned this before. Your goal is to support your peer. You support your peer, not their goal, and the peer working towards their goal. Taking their goal on ourselves can make it harder to keep boundaries that allow the peer to gain skills and resources to move into recovery. Sometimes that means that a peer says, I want to go to Walmart today, and you show up and they are dragging themselves out of bed and they are absolutely not ready to go, and it's going to take over an hour for them to be ready to go. And you know from experience and from certain other limitations that a trip to Walmart takes a minimum of an hour and a half. What might be an appropriate boundary to set in a situation like that? And this is hard because the peer wants to go. But was it your choices that might get in the way? Other transportation, that's a possibility. I think that that one might be kind of hard because it's about supporting the peer. We're not there for transportation, right? We're there to support them, and we would be supporting them at Walmart, but we can reschedule for another day. That's a good one. Because of our time constraints, I can help you get going today, or I can support you while you work towards your goals today, but we aren't going to make it, we don't have the time to make it within the time that we have for our appointment. What I might ask more open-ended questions. What can you do next time, or that would help avoid this consequence? Because did this situation have anything to do with us or our choices? Nope. Now, this gives the peer the power. The peer may not like it, but the thing is, power and responsibility they can't be separated. If we give them the power that they can have, then they may be able to recognize, oh, I have power to choose how I get ready for the appointment, when I get ready for the appointment, the choices that I make. This is where I have power, and I can affect the outcome of whether or not we can go. But if we say, oh, well, we can make it run a little bit long, or I'll help you get ready so you can get ready faster, or I will cross boundaries, we take away those consequences, but we take away their power. It is a natural consequence. That's the thing about most consequences, is they're mostly natural. Now, if we apologize in this, is that going to help the situation? When we apologize, it's communicating that we feel responsible and there's something that we've done wrong. But is there anything that we've done wrong or that we're responsible for in this situation? Nope. Absolutely. So we do not want to apologize. We want to set clear boundaries and consequences. We cannot meet today because we need to, as you know, we need to meet within this time. What can you do? Where is the power that you have, and what can you do differently to reach the goal that you have? Yep, no responsibility at all. And it's not like we don't care. We want to support them. We want to meet them where they're at. But part of that is helping support them and finding the power that they have, which is I have the power to find tools, build up resilience to maybe get up at an earlier time, to make sure that I'm at this point of being ready by the time you get there. Yeah, certified peers, CFSPs are not necessarily in recovery. This is true. They are the parent and guardian of, so they have some lived experience, but they don't necessarily have a diagnosis. This is true. But hopefully we've learned a lot through our experience that way, right? So tip number 2, are you seeing the peers' barriers and limitations or their strengths? If you're looking for ways to help and fix things, then you're not strengths focused. And the peer may not be able to easily identify their strengths now either, but trying to fix things, they won't be able to find them. Focus on what the peer can do, even if it currently seems small or like there's not much there. Find hope in that. Support that. Your hope and focus can help your peer feel more capable and safer as they move in a positive direction. If we support and find hope in that and believe that there are things that they can do, the peer has a better chance of being able to think, they think I can do it. They're asking me how to do it. They think I can, so maybe I can. And that's a big part of recovery, right? Good boundaries focus on what is, not what should be. If we allow our perception to be tainted by what we think a body or peer or family or system or ourselves should be doing, we will either become frustrated or try to fill in missing gaps by letting boundaries slip. We focus on what is, and there's not a judgment with that. This person is not ready. It's not that they're lazy. There's no judgment with that. They're not ready to go at the appointed time. And that's nothing bad about it. It's where they are. That is what is. So then we identify what they can do. Yes, and Stephanie, I do with our participants, not for or to them. Never for or to. We do with. We support them while they work. We support them while they practice. We support them while they find the tools, build up the courage, find the confidence, build up the resilience. We support them in the most essential and core parts of recovery. Some contact information. Well, what questions do you guys have with the stuff that we've covered today? Anything? Can we take you in a hold up? No. I've had people, I will recommend, I always recommend this, for practicing open-ended questions, because open-ended questions give power. And one of the things I recommend is writing down the words how, what, who, where, when, because those can be great starts to open-ended questions. And when we're in a panic, oh no, having those things sounds like, what does that look like to you? How can you do this? Who has helped you in the past? That sort of thing. Thanks, you guys. You guys have been a great class on this one. So certification training information, peersupportidaho.com. If you know people looking into that, me and Michelle Takagi, who is also in this class. Hi, Michelle. We train that every few months. If you know people and want to send them to that training. My email is there if you have questions in the future. You guys are, it's a thing to practice. It's like the violin. Some of these, well, I should be good at this already. Not necessarily. We practice and we don't yell at babies when we're new at it.
Dyany, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your participation. It was a great presentation because of all of you and Dyany together. I will send an email in the next hour or so with the survey link. It is in the chat right now. Also, so is Dyany's email and her website. And I'm going to remind you, you can check your confirmation or reminder email for full CEU requirements. And you've got 2 business days, basically 48 hours from the session to complete the survey, and you can redo it as many times as you want in that period of time. If you have any direct questions to Empower Idaho, I'll have Eden put our email back in the chat again. The slides and recording will be available on the website in a couple of days. And we hope to see you in our sessions tomorrow also. Thank you all for attending. And once again, thank you, Dyany. It was a wonderful, wonderful session.
Thank you, everybody. You guys did great.
Dyany, I wanted to let you know that Alejandra could not make it, and she wanted me to extend her regrets and was really happy to hear how great the session was going.
Oh, good. Well, I mean, she's seen most of it before, so it's all good. Thanks,
Have a great
everyone.
day, everybody. Thanks, Dyany.